Somebody said, you can make $6 standing up at a club. And I said, here I go. It was better than typing all day. There's a lot said in that sentence. Think of the year 1965. We're in the middle of a horrifying war. There are a lot of troubles, and women don't have a lot of chances. And Joan Rivers was looking for a chance, and she made it in a career for which she wasn't even looking. This was her side job to pay her bills while she tried to get dramatic roles. And instead, boom, onto a trip to Johnny Carson. It was the early 1960s when she was doing that, 1962, 63, when she was picking up $6 a night in comedy clubs while auditioning for the rest. And then, just 2 years later, Johnny Carson would tell the world that she was funny. And that was the end of that. Her nightclub career prospered, and by late in 1965, she'd recorded her first comedy album. It was called Joan Rivers Presents Mr. Phyllis and Other Funny Stories. Her personal life picked up as well. She met the British producer Rosenberg, about whom we spoke just a little while ago, who would later commit suicide, and they married after a 4-day courtship. Joan Rivers met her husband, and 5 days later they got married. She hosted a morning talk show on NBC in the year 1968, and the next year she made her Las Vegas debut with female comedians. That was still a relative rarity. In 1968, there were still rarely females leading anything, especially not in the comedy world. But Joan Rivers did it. She brought other women to her side, and she took her act to Las Vegas and beyond. And she had a quote in 1977 to the Los Angeles Times, and it's this: "To control an audience is a very masculine thing. The minute a lady is in the form of power, they, meaning the public, totally strip away your femininity," which isn't so. Catherine the Great had a great time. Joan Rivers from 1977. And then the next year she wrote and directed and co-starred in the movie Rabbit Test. It had an intriguing premise, really. Again, this is from Associated Press. Billy Crystal as a man who got pregnant but was poorly received. And in 1983, she scored a coup when she was named permanent guest host for Carson on The Tonight Show. Think of that. Unheard of years prior to that. No woman had led in that way. No woman had ever taken to comedy in the way this lady did. Johnny Carson gave her her shot, and then Johnny Carson made her the full-time fill-in. And if you are of a certain age, you know, Johnny Carson was one to take time off. So we all saw a lot of Joan Rivers in those days. She drew good ratings on NBC, but they didn't renew her contract 3 years later, and a fledgling network called Fox jumped in with an offer of a late-night show of her own, and they called it The Late Show starring Joan Rivers. That started in 1986, but it didn't last long, just one season, and as we've mentioned before, her husband committed suicide on the back of that. And at the time, Joan Rivers said the weight of that failure weighed heavily on him. She was mad at him, said Liz Smith, for killing himself, but Joan Rivers believed and said at the time that she believed that was a factor in his suicide. Johnny Carson said, "There are a lot of big confrontations this week," as the audience giggled inexplicably. Reagan and Gorbachev, the Mets versus the Astros, and me versus the Honeymooners' lost episodes. Her show was gone a year later and would declare that she had been raped by Fox. 3 months later, her husband was found dead. It took 2 years to get her career going again, but then she never stopped. She did not stop until she died. She didn't stop until she went into a hospital 1 week ago. Joan Rivers never stopped. She appeared in clubs and on TV shows, including the Hollywood Squares. Who can forget Joan Rivers in the Center Square? I know I never will. She appeared on Broadway and released more comedy albums and books, most recently, Diary of a Mad Diva. She once joked that there was not one female comic who was beautiful as a little girl. Think of it. She was born Joan Malinsky in Brooklyn to Russian immigrants, a doctor, and his wife. She had a privileged upbringing but struggled with weight. She was a self-proclaimed fatty as a child. She recalled using make-believe as an escape. And after graduating from Barnard College in 1954, she went on to work as a department store fashion coordinator and then eventually turned to comedy clubs. Her marriage to Jimmy Sanger lasted 6 months. It is a long, astounding, trailblazing career, and not to say that she did not have her detractors. If you're one who does not like to hear a vulgar word from time to time, you probably were not a fan. But when you get past all of that and realize the trails that she blazed, Joan Rivers will go down in history as a pioneering woman of her time and in our country. Our senior correspondent Rick Leventhal with us now on the death of Joan Rivers, who died today at the age of 81. Rick?
And Shepard, Mount Sinai, where her daughter says she passed, has not yet released a statement. They don't have any news conferences planned. They're not confirming that Joan Rivers died, but of course her daughter has, Melissa has confirmed, releasing a statement a short time ago that her mother passed peacefully at 1:17 this afternoon, surrounded by family and close friends. And she thanked the staff of Mount Sinai Hospital for the care that they provided her mother. And you know, Shepard, you mentioned that tough year she had in 1987 when she lost her show on Fox and her husband committed suicide. She told the Daily Beast that she too considered suicide at one point, that she was sitting in a chair with a gun on her lap, and she said that her dog jumped into her lap and she thought no one will take care of him, and that's why she decided to spare her own life, to not kill herself. She said she lectured on suicide because things turn around. She tells people this is a horrible, awful, dark moment, but it will change, and you must know it's going to change, and you push forward. She said, I look back and think, life is great, life goes on, it changes. Shepard.
Rick Leventhal, live for us. Rick, thanks very much. There is breaking news now on Fox News Channel.